artist back in 1984, with text by George Mackay Brown. Now, bestiaries were very popular in the Middle Ages. They were collections of stories relating to creatures, both real and imagined. And a lot of the bestiaries, the medieval ones, were based on a work called Natural History by Pliny the Elder, who was, he came a cropper in 79 AD trying to evacuate the inhabitants of Pompeii and Herculaneum from the eruption of Vesuvius. He was a victim of that. But he wrote this wonderful natural history that people used up until fairly recent times, which had some wonderful stories about like bears. When a bear gives birth, it doesn't give birth to a fully formed cub, it gives birth to a blob, which it then has to lick to turn into the shape of a bear, hence the expression to be licked into shape. That's where it comes from, Romans. We now know that's not true, but they were quite happy with what Pliny said it. So. Well, I'm just going to fire in a few stories related to some of the images here, not all of them, otherwise it would be a lot more than four, and I think most folks would be needing to get away and have a cup of tea by then. I certainly would. I wasn't going to do the lobster one, but I just can't resist a wee story. It's not, because I'm doing like Orkney, Shetland, Scotland stories, but there is a lovely wee story from Sweden, which there was a place called Gotham that had the wise men of Gotham who were all really, really stupid. And one day a lobster crawled out the sea and they saw this magnificent creature in blue shiny armour, and they thought it must be a knight from a realm under the sea. So they went down and invited it very politely to come up to the king's castle to dine with them. And it ignored them, and so they tried several times to order it. They got to the castle, it didn't do anything. So they decided this was a slight on the king, and they were not happy. So they decided to kill it. And they decided, well, how are we going to do it? It doesn't really have a neck, can't hang it. What are we going to do? And somebody came up with the bright idea, let's drown it. So they took it out of the water, dropped it in the sea. Gotham, of course, ended up, this was a fictional place, but it ended up being used in Batman. Gotham City was based on the wise men of Gotham in Sweden. Eagles, Erns in Orkney, as they are known, from the Old North. There is numerous stories all around the world about babies being abducted by eagles. We have one here as well. There was an old man pointed out in the early 19th century saying, with the claim that he was abducted by an eagle as a baby, brought to a nest that was rescued before he came into any harm. I believe that the pub that in Oxford that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and the other Inklings used to drink in was called the Eagle and Child, or the Bird and Baby, as they called it, which I guess is based on the story as well. My favourite version comes from Shetland. From the island of Hunts, the most northerly island of Shetland. And there was a crofter there called Willie Anderson. And Willie was, his wife was working in the field one day, and she wrapped the baby up in a shawl and set it down at the edge of the field while she was working. And an eagle swooped in and grabbed the baby, which was a little girl, and it was seen flying off to the island of Fetla. So they got a boat and they chased the eagle across to Fetla. And when they landed there, they told the people what had happened, that the child, this little girl, had been abducted by the eagle. And they knew where the eagle nest was. So they went out to that area, which was sheer cliffs. And there was one young lad from Fetla who volunteered to go down on a rope. And being a young guy, 12 years old, he was pretty slightly built, so it was easy for him to go down there. And so Robbie Nicholson was his name. He was lowered down the cliff on a rope, and he found the baby lying between two eaglets. And so he picked up the baby, climbed the back up, and it was reunited with its father. And they said that later on, that boy from Fettler went to Unst, and he met a girl that he fell in love with, and the two of them were married. And it turned out it was the same baby he had rescued from the eagle's nest. What else have we got? Stags. The stag is obviously a symbol that is used a lot in heraldry. But there was a story with a very specific date. Most folk tales, it's just like long, long ago. But King David I of Scotland, the King of Scotland, he was the son of King Malcolm Canmore, and Margaret, who became a saint, she established a ferry to go across the Firth of Forth to carry pilgrims to Dunfermline Abbey, and they called it Queen's Ferry, and it's still placed in to this day. She also had a chapel in South Ronaldsay that gave its name to St Margaret's Hope. That is the St Margaret. This is this guy's mum. Now, he loved to go hunting. That was his great passion in life, was to go hunting. And in the year 1128, he decided to set off one day to go on a hunting expedition. But the priest said, "You can't go today. It's September the 14th. It is the feast of the Holy Rood." Now, the Rood was the name for the cross. And this was a very, very sacred day in the Catholic Church. And there was no way that you should be going out hunting on that day. But he said he was going hunting anyway, and off he went. Now, during the hunt, he got separated from the rest of the men, and he found himself alone in the woods, and a huge stag came up, a magnificent beast. So he tried to kill it, but the stag charged at him on his horse, knocked him off his horse, and then lowered its head and ran towards him like it was going to kill him with its antlers. The king grabbed the stag by the antlers, and as he wrestled and twisted with it, the antlers seemed to form into the shape of a cross and came free. The stag ran away, and he was left there holding this cross, which he saw as being a chastisement from God for having broken this sacred holy day. And he went back to the abbey, and he was told, or he had had like a voice in his head that said he had to dedicate an abbey and to the Holy Cross. And that was duly built as an Augustinian monastery, and it was called Holyrood, and that is where we get Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh. So, mice and Robbie Burns, you know all about that. Whales, well, we've got quite a few whale stories as well, but the one that I like, a lesser known one, was there was a woman that lived out at Scapa who had the reputation of being a witch. And she had one child, she had a son. And the one day there was a cry that there was whales in the Scapa Flow, wooden pilot whales. And the men were getting boats ready to go and try to drive them ashore to hunt them for the meat and for the oil. Now, the witch's son wanted to go, but his mother said, "No, you can't go. It's dangerous work. You're too young." So she forbade him to go. But he went anyway. Young people are impetuous, and so off he went with the boat. And of course, what they had to do was to get out into the sea so that the whales were between the boats and the shore. And then they made as much noise as possible. It frightened the whales. They swam away from the noise and onto the beach. So that's what they did. And the whales were beached at Scapa. And the men were down there then with knives to kill them and ready to cut them up for meat and for the blubber. And the witch came down there and she saw that her son had disobeyed her. He had gone with men when she had told him not to. So she went out into the water at Scapa as far as she could go. She had a thimble on her finger. And she bore the thimble down into the sand of the beach, which then when she lifted her finger, the thimble remained there and the sand closed over it. And she declared that there would be no more whales caught at Scapa Beach until that thimble was found. And no one ever did. And they said that no whales ever came in there again. So maybe that's what you need to do if you're in a cetacean group. Go and stick the dog, a knuckleavy instead. Now the knuckleavy, you know the worst nightmare you've ever had in your life? You know the one when you wake up, sweating and panicking, your heart pounding. That's like a walk in the park compared to meeting a knuckleavy. They were the most horrendous, the most evil, and the most terrifying of all the creatures of Orkney folklore. They lived in the sea, and they had a great fear of fresh water, which was the only thing that prevented them from destroying the islands. Because during the summer months, the sea was ruled by a spirit, a goddess, called the Mother of the Sea. And she locked up the knuckleavy all summer, when you might hope to get some dry weather, and the knuckleavy could come ashore. Now, she would fight a male spirit called Terran during the equinox. It has just happened. Terran is now very much firmly in control. I'm sure if you went into the shops and admired the empty shelves, you would see that he's doing his job pretty good at the moment. Now, he turns the knuckleavy loose, and then he can come ashore. But of course, in the winter, there's lots of rain, so he can't really destroy the land like he would wish to. And then in the spring, when the Mother of the Sea gets her strength back, she goes from exile on land into the sea, fights Terran, and overcomes him and binds him up at the bottom of the sea. And then restores peace and tranquility and life to the sea, and locks up the knuckleavy. Now the knuckleavy, although depicted here as having the legs of a horse, was actually a weird hybrid creature. No one is really sure in the descriptions of him whether it was a rider on a horse or whether the two were this one and the same creature. Because some said that the rider seemed to grow out of the back of the horse. Now, the horse was an awful sight. Some people said it had one single eye in the centre of its head that glowed red. And others said that the rider and the horse were separate, that the rider had huge feet but no toes. They had very long arms that almost touched the ground, and the head of the knuckleavy was 10 times the size of a normal human head. They said it was the size of Cluas Simmons, which was the big rolls of straw roll, which is about 3 foot in diameter. So a big-headed lad. And its neck couldn't support the weight of its head, so the head would loll from side to side as it processed along the seashore. But the thing that was most scary of the knuckleavy was its skin. It didn't have any. It was red, raw flesh. And you could see the black blood coursing in its veins. And the sinew, as thick as a horse's tether, would twist and turn as the creature moved. And it hated mankind, and it would have destroyed everybody and everything on the island if it had the opportunity. Now, there was a young lad in Sandy called Tammy Scott, and he was going home late one night, walking along the shore, and he saw a figure in the distance. In the darkness, there was an area that was even darker than the darkest piece of the darkness, and it seemed to be moving. He carried on going, but as he got nearer, he could see that this thing was taking shape, and it definitely was moving. He thought to himself, well, I'm not out on any evil cause tonight. I have nothing to fear from this, whatever it is that is down on the shore. So he carried on going. But when he got a bit nearer, he saw, to his horror, that it was the Nuckleby. He saw the red, raw flesh, the sinews and the blood pumping through its veins. And he realised that they always said that it was better to face an uncanny creature than to turn your back on it. So he walked towards it, and the creature noticed him. He could hear a roar coming from the mouth of the horse that sounded like the ocean when the waves are churning, a deep, deep sound. And around the legs of the horse there seemed to be flaps of skin, almost like flippers, dangling from it. Now, he started to step backwards, but still facing it. The creature turned and came up to him so close that he could feel now the hot breath of the horse as it burst from its nostrils into his face. And oh, the smell of salt in that breath. And then the Nuckleby swept with his great hands to snatch him. But he jumped back into a little loch that was by the side of the shore. And as he did that, he splashed some of the fresh water onto the front legs of the Nuckleby's horse, and it roared out in pain, because fresh water to the Nuckleby burned like acid. The horse was in agony, and it drew back. Tam then realised that if he ran for all his might, there was a small stream that ran from that loch down to the sea. And he knew that crossing running fresh water was a protection against all supernatural creatures. You've read Tam O'Shanter by Robbie Burns. They have to get over that bridge to get away from the witches. It's the same, ghosts can't cross running water, neither can Nuckleby. So he set off and he ran for his life. By this time, the Nuckleby had regained, or the horse had regained its composure. And there was a roar of anger from the Nuckleby as it spurred the horse on to chase him. Faster and faster it went. He would hear the hooves of the beach pounding away as he ran towards that wee stream. And he could feel the hot breath again on the back of his neck. Just as he reached it, the Nuckleby swept its huge hand and it snatched the bonnet off his head. But Tam managed to jump across the stream and onto the other side, and safely. The Nuckleby roared in anger because it had lost its prey. And after that, you can be sure that Tammy Scott never went down to the shore after dark for the rest of his life. I don't bloody blame him. Knew that. Salmon, we got one on salmon knowledge, but I'll time to go into that. One of those kind of what if things where Finn McCool, we had another name in those days. An old man was fishing for the salmon knowledge in the waterfall. He'd been dead his whole life because he'd had that somebody called Finn was going to find it, and he was called Finn. And the young Finn McCool managed to catch the salmon and they cooked it, and he said, I'm going to take a nap now, but don't you eat any of that salmon. So I mean, you can guess where that's going. Can't you? A blister rose up on the skin of the fish, and he poked it, and the hot water inside of the juices ran onto his finger and burnt him, and he went, "Whoa!" and he put his finger in his mouth, and then he got all the knowledge of everything that had been, will be, and is. And also he understood the language of birds and animals. And when the old man woke up and ate some of the fish and nothing happened, he said, "Did you have any of that?" And I said, "Well, I poked it in." And he said, "Do you have any other names?" And he said, "Well, they call me Finn." Finn means fair, because he had fair hair. And so that was the old man was touched, as you can imagine, but spending his entire life sitting around there. The Stewart one of my favourites. I'll probably have to give you a slightly condensed version because it's kind of long. There was once a farmer that lived at Leaker, and he worked hard on land with his wife and his 7 sons. Well, that's not strictly true. The 6 eldest sons worked hard on the farm. The youngest one did nothing but lie by the side of the fire, raking through the ashes. And they called him Assipattle, which just means ash raker. And he became covered in ashes, so when he went out, it blew off him like smoke from a bonfire. And his parents would just shake their heads over them and go, "Boy, boy, boy." And the brothers used to give him a kick as they went past him. Put away Assipattle. They hated him because he didn't do anything. But he was a great storyteller. I'm the youngest of 6. He was a great storyteller. And in all the stories, he was the hero that won the day and saved the princess and killed the dragon. And his brothers hated him even more for that. But one day a terrible thing happened because the stewardman arrived at the land where Assipattle lived. And this was no ordinary stewardworm, this was the Mester stewardworm. Some folk call it the Muckle-Mester stewardworm, which is funny because it means big, big, big snake or worm, dragon. Orm from Old Norse means worm, and it's anything serpentine, anything long and wriggly, from an earthworm to a snake to a dragon is a worm. Stewar is Old Norse for big. Mester is an Orkney dialect word meaning big. And muckle is a Scottish word meaning big. It's a big, big word. And it deserves that because it is so huge it curled right the way around the world, and every time it moved it caused earthquakes and tidal waves and flooded the land. But it had arrived at the land where Assipattle lived, and it had started to yawn, which was a bad sign, because that didn't mean that it was tired, it meant it was hungry and it wanted to be fed. Now, the king gathered all his men together and asked for advice, and nobody had a clue, nobody had any idea. But they called for the spaeman, a wise man, a wizard you would call him, and he came down and said, "The stewardworm has grown old now, and he has travelled the world and he has eaten all sorts of exotic people. But in his old age, he's developed a bit of a sweet tooth. So if you were to feed him 7 maidens every Saturday morning for his breakfast, then he will leave the land alone and not destroy it." So every Saturday morning, 7 maidens were bound hand and foot and placed on a rock in front of the stewardworm's head. He would yawn 7 great yawns and then flick out his forked tongue, and he would pick up the girls between the forks and munch them down like sweeties. Now, time passed and people complained that their daughters were being eaten up and they wanted an end to this. So the spaeman was called back again, but the only advice that he could give was the only way to satisfy the monster and be rid of him is to give him the loveliest maiden in all the land, your daughter, the princess, Chem de Lovely. If he has her for his breakfast, he will leave the land alone. "No, that's too high a price to pay," said his men. But the king said, "No, it's only right that my daughter, descended from the god Odin as we are, should die, so that her people can live. But grant me one indulgence, give me 3 weeks to find a brave knight that will fight and kill the steward one. A proclamation went through the land. The king was offering his magic sword, Sickersnapper, his kingdom and his daughter's hand in marriage to any man that would kill the steward one. 36 brave knights rode into town, but when they caught sight of just how big the steward one was, then 12 of them rode through the town, out the other side of the town, and ran off home as fast as they could. Another 12 fainted and had to be carried off, boot first on a stretcher. And the other 12 just went up to the king's castle and inquired the whereabouts of the wine cellar and just sat there and got hammered. Totally depressed. And the old king looked at them and he was furious because in his veins ran the blood of an older and nobler race. And he said, "Fetch me my sword, Sickersnapper. I will fight the steward one and kill him in the morning or die in the attempt." Now, news spread over the world like gossip, and you know how fast that spreads. It was everywhere in no time at all. You didn't need Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, nothing like that. Everybody knew the king was going to fight the steward one. Now, back at Liga, Asipattle was lying by the side of the fire one night when he heard his parents talking. And the old man was saying, "So, tomorrow, the king's going to fight the steward one. Let's go along and watch it. I'll take you on my horse, Teatgo, fastest horse in the land, you know." Said his wife. What do you mean? She said. "You're keeping a secret from me, and I don't like that. Husbands shouldn't have any secrets from their wives, isn't that right?" So he says, "I don't have any secrets from you, my dear." And she goes, "Yes, you do. That horse of yours, Teatgo, fastest horse in the land," he says. "Yeah, what is it that makes that horse so fast? There's something that you do, and you never told me. What is it with that horse?" "I can't tell you that," he said. "Why not?" "Well, it's kind of, it's kind of a secret." "Exactly," she said. "And if you've got one secret, you might have others." "Oh, I don't, dear." And so they argued over it for a while, until in the end the man said, okay, I'll tell you. If I want that horse to stand still, rock still, I give him a pat on the left shoulder. If I want him to run as fast as the wind, I give him a pat on the right shoulder. But if I want him to run faster than the wind, I blow through a goose's trapple. Now, I don't know if you know what a trapple is, but we've all got one. It's a windpipe. And he says, I always keep a goose's trapple, the windpipe, in the jacket of my coat for emergencies. So, happily, the old woman then went back to sleep. Two of them were soon snoring, and Asipattle sneaked from the fireside, and he went to the stable where Teatgong, the horse, was stable. I should say that Teatgong was an old Orkney word for a sudden gust of wind. This horse could run as fast as the wind, and so it was named after the wind. So he went out, and the horse started to rear up and neigh and kick because this wasn't its master coming. But he gave it a pat on the left shoulder, and it stood still. And he climbed on its back, and he gave it a pat on the right shoulder, and it ran out as fast as it could out the door, and it let out a loud neigh at the same time, which woke up the old man and his sons, and they got out after him, not knowing that it was Asipattle. They thought it was a horse thief. They took horses and they rode after him, and the old man was catching up, and he shouted out, "Hi, hi, ho, Teatgong, ho!" And Teatgong slammed its hoofs in and came to a sudden stop. But he pulled out the goose's trapple that he'd stolen from his father's pocket, and he blew through it. And as soon as it heard it, the ears pricked up, and it went like an arrow from a bow right across the hillside and gone. So they just had to go home thinking they would never see that horse again. Now he rode through the night until he came to a great bay, and in the bay there was a big black island, but it wasn't really an island, it was the Stoorworm's head. And he went down to the coast, down to the shore, where there was a wee house where an old woman was lying, sleeping in a box bed with a great cat curled up at her feet. And she had rested the fire for the night. You see, it was bad luck. Consider very bad luck to let your fire go out. You had to keep it alive, had to keep it going. The luck of the house depended on the hearth. And what they did at night was they would put some big damp peats on it, and it would just keep it smouldering over the night. And then in the morning, put some dry peats on it, maybe give a puff of the bellows, away it would go. Cynics might say that it's because firelighters hadn't been invented, but anyway, far from me to ruin the story. So Asipattle went over to the fire, and he picked up a 3-toed iron pot, and he took the tongs and he picked a glowing peat out of the fire and he put it in the pot, and he headed down to the shore, and there was the king's boat with the king's guard standing inside it, freezing cold because it was a cold night, and he was rubbing his hand and baiting flukes, as we used to say when I was PD. You're going like this, trying to get some circulation back in you because you're so cold. Hello, he said. How are you doing? Said Asipattle. Cold, he said. I can see that. I'm just going to light a wee fire here and boil up some limpets for my breakfast. He says, would you like to come join me and have a warm by the fire? Nah, he says, I can't leave this boat. King would have my skin if I abandoned my boat. Suit yourself, he said. So he started to dig in the ground like he was going to make a small hearth for his fire. And he shouted, gold! Gold! There's gold here! And as soon as the guard heard that, he went, gold? Where? Ran out the boat, pushed Asipattle over the way and started digging in the dark like a dog. Asipattle picked up the pot with the peat in it and he ran down to the boat, cast off the rope, hoisted the sail, and was away across the bay before the man realised he'd been tricked. Now, as he was heading off towards the Stoorworm, he looked behind him and he could see the king and his men had just arrived on horses on the beach, but too late. And the sun had just started to rise above the horizon, and the Stoorworm started to yawn, the first of his 7 yawns. And Asipattle positioned the boat right in front of his mouth, so when it yawned again, the water that swept into the mouth carried the boat into it, and all the way down the Stoorworm's throat, down into its belly. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the internal plumbing to a Stoorworm or not, but if not, it's just one great long tunnel. But then there are other little tunnels running off here and there, and some water was going off down here and some water was going down there. And it got shallower and shallower until the boat grounded. The inside of the Stoorworm glowed with a green phosphorescent glow that was called the miracles in Orkney. It was the phosphorescence, you see, in the sea. And he could see where he was going, and he ran and he ran and he bit around with his pot with his peat in it until he got to what he was looking for. It was the Stoorworm's liver. Now, you know the amount of oil there is in fish liver, you know, you get cod liver oil capsules and all that. Imagine the oil in a Stoorworm's liver. There's renewable energy for you. He took his knife out and he cut a hole in the liver and he put the burning peat in it, and he blew and he blew and he better blew until it spluttered into flame and the Stoorworm's liver started to burn. And then he ran back to the boat. Now the king was having a bad day because to start with he had to get up really early in the morning, which that's going to put me in a bad mood for the day anyway. Not a morning person. And then he had to go off to meet certain death. And then he turned sometime just to see some idiot stealing his boat, sailing across the bay, and getting swallowed by a storm. Oh, brilliant. It doesn't get any better than that, does it? So he's stomping about on the shore in a huff. And one of his men said, Your Majesty. What? I've never seen the Stoorworm do that. I thought. Do what? Well, he's kind of, he's kind of smoking. Smoking? What do you mean? He goes, well, look at him. So they're looking, sure enough, there was black smoke billowing out Stoorworm's nostrils and out his mouth. And the Stoorworm was starting to feel sick. It was thinking that maybe I shouldn't have had that last maiden and didn't agree with me. And he started to feel sick, and he started to retch, and he spewed up all the water that was in his stomach. Came out as a great tidal wave with assy paddle in his boat on the top of it. Now the king and his men and the old woman and their cat from the house that came out to see what the noise was about, everybody ran up the hillside to safety, and the boat was cast up among them high and dry. Now the Stoorworm's days was numbered. The black smoke filled the air that turned the day to night. The Stoorworm in its pain shot out its huge forked tongue, and it caught hold of the moon, and they said it would have pulled the moon out of the sky, but luckily it was a new moon, so it was only a crescent. And the fork of the tongue slipped over the horn of the moon, and it came down to earth with a crash, and it left a huge hole in the surface of the world, which cut off the land of Sweden and Denmark from Norway. That's the wrong way around. Cut off the lands of Norway and Sweden from Denmark even. And there it remains to this day. Water flowed into the hole, and it created the Baltic Sea. And if you look at the map, you can see the two big forks of the Stoorworm's tongue. It's clear to be seen. Then it rose its head up out of the sea, and it came down with a crash, and a lot of its teeth got knocked out into the sea, and that made the Orkney Islands. And then the second time the head rose and fell, and more teeth was knocked out, and that made Shetland. And the third time the head rose and fell, and more teeth was scattered, made the Faroe Islands, and then it curled up into a lump and died. And there it remains to this day as Iceland. And the flames that you see dancing from the mountains and the hot water bubbling out of the ground is all because the Stoorworm's liver is still burning. The king took Assi-Pat in his arms and said, my son, my sword is yours in my kingdom, and my daughter, if she will have you. And the princess looked at him, and with all that running through the night on the horse, all that ash had blown off him, he was actually a really good looking guy. And so she fell in love with him, and the two of them were married. And if they're not dead, then they're living yet. Seal, like, I can do this. I have no idea how the hell long this was going to be. It's been under-rehearsed, seals, Selkie folk. I mean, got a lot of Selkie stories. So I need to choose from, but I'll go with my favourite, which was from Stromness. And now there was, you can have Selkie folk, seals that can take the skin off and become human at certain times of the tide. They said that they were the souls of people that had drowned. Now, there was one young man who was walking home late one night, and he heard music coming down from the shore. And he didn't know what this was, but he was always up for a bit of a party, a bit of music. But he was also very aware that this might not be nice people. There could be a band of cutthroats there, sheep thieves, who knows? So he had to be careful. But the desire to know where the music was coming from was too great, so he went very carefully along the shore, and there was a little bit of a rocky headland sticking out from the banks, and he was able to hide behind that and then peep around the corner from the rocky beach he was on. And there, in the moonlight in front of him, was a beautiful sandy bay, and there was a group of people dancing in the moonlight. And the music that he'd heard was coming from two men playing fiddles who were sitting on a flat rock. Now, the dancers were all dancing away, merrily laughing, and around them there lay dark shapes like animals lying asleep. Now, the man got down on his belly and he crawled towards where these sleeping animals were. And when he got there, he realized that they were sealskins, empty sealskins. And he knew then that this must be the Selkie folk. This was the dancing night when they could take the skin off and become human again. That they had to be back in the sea at sunrise. One of the skins was more beautiful than the others. It was a soft, silvery, silky skin. And he rolled it up, put it under his jacket, and went back to his hiding place. Now, they danced and danced. And when the sun first appeared above the horizon, the music stopped, and they all ran to their skins, pulled them back on, and were back in the sea as seals again. All except for one young woman who frantically searched for her skin among the rocks and the seaweed, but she couldn't find it. In her despair, she ran right around the corner of that rock and right into the young man's arms. And he grabbed her and he looked down into her big, brown, frightened eyes, and he thought he'd never seen a more beautiful woman in all his life. And he knew that he would never be happy unless he had her as his wife. She had other ideas, mind you. She punched him and kicked him and bit him and scratched him and squeaked it out in the Selkie tongue, because the Selkies have their own way of speaking as well. But he carried her up to his house where he lived with his mother. And when his mother saw him coming in with this poor naked girl in his arms, she knew. She saw the sealskin under his jacket. She knew what the girl was. And she pitied her. So she sat by the fire, the Selkie woman sobbing. And the old woman went to the bed end of the house, to the best room, and she opened the chest there, the big sea chest, and dug down till she found a dress that she used to wear when she was young and slim and beautiful. And she thought, it's about the right size. So she took it through and she helped the girl to put it on. And she was kind to the girl. She spoke kindly to her. And after about 3 weeks, the sobbing stopped. And the man was very kind towards her too, very loving. And she learned from the old woman how to bake and brew ale and spin wool and all these things that was considered essential for a wife in those days. And it was obvious that she was very attached to this man. She followed him everywhere. And it was no surprise when the two of them were married. And as the years went by, babies were born. And they were happy. Now one day, the Selkie woman took her husband aside and said, "You know that I am a creature of the sea, and I know that you have my skin, and I know where you keep it. It's in the chest in the ben end of the house. And I know that you always keep that locked, and you always keep the key on your person. But I want you to make me a promise. If you love me, if you really love me, never let me get that key, because I don't know if I would have the strength to be able to resist going back to the ocean." The man promised faithfully that he would never put her in that position. Now time passed, and it was August. It was time of the Lammas Fair in Kirkwall, which a big event where people came from all over Orkney, from Shetland and from Scotland, and they would gather there, and things were sold and traded, and it was a great event. And the man decided that he would take the bairns there as a special treat. So he got them all washed up and in their best clothes, and he washed and shaved, and he put on his best Sunday suit. And he said to his wife, "Would you like to come with us?" And she said, "No, with you out of the way, I'll be able to give the place a bit of a clean up without you under my feet. And it would be nice just to, have a few hours to myself anyway." So he set off on a horse and cart with the bairns, and they trundled all the way from Stromness into Kirkwall. And they had a wonderful day. The bairns played on swing boats, and they ate spun sugar on sticks and things that they'd never seen or heard of before. They had a lovely time. And when they went home in the evening, they were sleepy, and one of the youngest ones were curled up sleeping in the cart. And they trundled back to the house, and when they got nearer, he could see that something wasn't right. There was no light in the window, there was no smoke coming from the chimney. And when he got nearer, he saw that the front door was wide open. And he ran inside and he shouted for his silky wife, but there was no answer. And then a terrible thought gripped him, and he ran through to the ben end of the house, and there was the kist with the key in the lock and the lid wide open, and the skin was gone. And he knew then what had happened. In his haste to be away, he'd got the bairns all ready, and he'd had his wash and his shave, and he'd put on his best suit, but he'd forgot to take the key out of the pocket of his jacket. And when the Selkie woman was tidying up, she wouldn't have been looking for it, but when she picked up that jacket and felt that big cast iron key in the pocket, she knew what it was. And she took it out and she looked at it. And she knew what that key unlocked and what was inside waiting for her. She went through to the ben end, she put the key in the lock and turned it with a click and opened the lid, and there was her sealskin. And when she saw it, the urge just to touch it one more time was too great. And when she touched it, the urge to pick it up was too strong. And then when she held it next to her, she could feel her old skin touching her human skin. And she could still smell the salt on it, the salt of the sea. She knew she had to go back. So she ran down to the shore, and with a cry of anger and anguish, she pulled on her sealskin, dived into the sea, and swam away. Now, the man spent the rest of his life searching for a Selkie wife, but he never found her again, never seen her. But they did say that when the bairns went down to the shore to play, a seal would swim backwards and forwards in front of them, sobbing like its heart was breaking. Moving on. Unicorn. I realised when I wrote the press release for doing this, and I said, I'll tell you a story about unicorn. And then I realised I don't know any stories about it. So, but I knew a man who did, Duncan Williamson. I mean, Duncan was one of the Traveller storytellers, and a fabulous storyteller. I mean, he was great. And one of my happy experiences with storytelling was just sitting down one night, drinking whiskey with Duncan, and he knew who to drink whiskey, the same as I do, which is about a half pint. And we swapped stories. It was just a treasure. You know, there were some storytellers like Stanley Robertson, wonderful, wonderful storytellers. And he had a story called The Coming of the Unicorn. I've never told it before, and I probably will never tell it again. You know. So here you go. Now, a long time ago in Scotland, there was a king. And the king was absolutely obsessed with hunting. He loved to hunt, like the story we did about King David I there. He loved to hunt. But he didn't hunt for the sport of it. He hunted for food. He hunted to supply food for the castle, but also for the village that lay nearby. He shared the food up with his people. Now, he had everything that he could want. He had a beautiful castle, he had a beautiful wife, he had good friends, and he had the hunts. He didn't hunt excessively. They went out about 3 or 4 times a year. That was all. And they were out the one day on a hunt through the woods, and the men would sometimes just like leave a free shot for the king so that he got the first chance, because he was an excellent shot with a bow and arrow. Now on this day, a bear appeared from out of the woods. And this was a game animal to them too. They would eat bear meat and they would use the skin. Now, the men parted so that the king had a straight, clear shot at it. And he drew back the arrow on his bow and he unleashed it, and it struck the bear right in the chest. And then a strange thing happened, because the bear made no sound, but it stood up on its hind legs, straight and erect. And it put its paw up to its chest, and it felt the arrow there, sticking in it, and its lifeblood ebbing away. And it took its paw away, and it looked, and it could see its own blood on the paw. And then he looked at the king right in the eyes, and the look of sadness and despair in the eyes of that bear touched the king's soul. It touched his heart in the same way that his arrow had touched the bear's heart. And then the bear fell over sideways and died. Now the king said that there would be no more hunting that day. His soul had gone from it. He couldn't bear to carry on any more that day, but he said, take the bear to the castle and divide its meat up among the people in the village, but I want that skin. And so they did as he was told. The skin was brought to the king, and he had it cured, and he laid it on the floor of his castle. And every time he looked at that skin, the sadness ate him up. The look that was in that bear's eye, the melancholy came. A wonderful way of putting it in Ireland is said, I have the sadness on me. The sadness was on him. Now, when it came time for another hunt, the king refused to go. You're a good huntsman, you can manage yourself, you don't need me. Now the queen was worried about the king because this was not like him, but the sorrow that was with him. He would speak to her, he would speak to people, he carried on his daily life like he'd always had done. But the sadness in his eyes was too much, and the fact that he just could not find pleasure out of anything in life any longer. So she went to consult 3 wise men, magicians, wizards you would call them. And they got together and they said, the only thing that could cure the king of the sorrow that lies on him is because of the bear that he killed. Every time he sees its skin, it reminds him of the sorrow. It makes no difference whether you take that skin away and hide it. That sorrow is in his heart. We must create something that will drag him out of it. We must create a magical creature, something that he will wish to hunt but can never catch. So they got together and they decided. The first magician said, I will make a horse that can run faster than the wind. The second magician said, and I will give it the fierceness of a boar. And the third said, and I will give it the courage of a lion. So they created a creature, a white horse. And the magician that gave it the fierceness of the boar, and he also gave it the tusk of a boar as well. But he didn't put the tusks in the mouth. He straightened it out and he put it on the forehead. And the other one gave it the courage and the strength of a lion. He didn't give it the body of a lion, he gave it the tail of a lion. And the creature was complete, beautiful and terrible. What shall we call it? We'll call it a unicorn. and was set free. And every time the king's men went hunting, the unicorn would appear, and it would attack them, knock them from their horses, and they were never able to hunt anything. They couldn't catch anything because the unicorn stopped them. They then tried to hunt the unicorn, but as fast as they rode after that creature, it outran them. They never got near, they couldn't get within an arrow shot of that creature, the speed it could run at. Word came back to the king. People are hungry. There is no meat. We have been unsuccessful in the hunt. How come? You guys are expert huntsmen. Why did you not bring anything from my people? Why are my people going hungry? There is an animal, sire. A new animal, one we've never seen before. It's beautiful and terrible. And we cannot catch it. Now when the king heard this, he said, an animal I have never seen before in my own kingdom. I don't believe it. And they said, Your Majesty, it's true. It is a creature that we have never seen the like of before. It is magical. Now with that, the memory of the bear left him, and he went out and saddled his horse, and he set off with his men. And as soon as they were in the woods, the unicorn appeared, prevented them from hunting any other creature. And then it ran off, and the king pursued it. The king chased it for days, but he never got near to catching it. And eventually he realized the folly of trying to catch a magical beast. A beast with the body of a white horse and the swiftness of the fastest horse, with a single horn on its head and the tail of a lion. So they decided that the best thing that they could do would be to give up on trying to catch this creature. But he ordered the stonemasons to come, and he commanded them to make 2 statues, one on either side of the door, of this beautiful beast that he described to them. And they carved from stone beautiful images of 2 unicorns that stood on either side of the door of his castle. And whenever he went out, he would always smile and stroke the creature and remember the beauty and the fierceness of this magical creature called the unicorn. And after that, it became the emblem of Scotland and was on the royal crest, and still is to this day, with a lion on one side for England and the unicorn for Scotland on the other. And that is the coming of the unicorn. Now the last story, I told a couple, but this was fast, don't worry. Raven. Now, you had stories of eagles carrying off babies earlier. The raven is a very clever bird. Now, on the slopes, on the cliffs at Dearness, there is a rose, a pink, fragrant rose that grows, and it's called the rose of kitten. It doesn't come from here. This is the story of how it took root in the East Mainland North. Now, there was a young man that worked at a lead mine in Dearness. They had tunnelled into the cliff, following a line of lead ore. And above them, there was a nest and a raven that lived up there. And the one young man was kind. He used to share his food with the raven. He would throw bits of bannock to it, a bit of cheese and a bit of meat, whatever he had. He would share a little bit of his food with the raven. And the raven would always come down and happily accept it. Now the other men used to try to shoo it off and throw stones at it and were bad to it. But it knew the young man and it knew his quality. Now, one day one of the men decided that it would be funny if they went up to the raven's nest, stole its eggs, and boiled them, and then put them back on the nest, and then, of course, the raven would be sitting on boiled eggs that had no hope of hatching, and it would be, it'd be funny. Now, the young man said, "You can't do that. That's a terrible thing to do. That's evil. You shouldn't do that." But, of course, they just laughed at him. They climbed up the cliff and they found the nest with the eggs in it. There was a raven will lay between 3 to 7 eggs. They gathered up whatever there was, put it in a cap, carried it back down and boiled it, and then returned the eggs to the nest before the raven came back. And they thought that this would be funny. The raven would sit there forever and nothing would happen. But as soon as the raven got back, it looked at the eggs, and it was as if the raven knew immediately what had happened and who was responsible. Now, a bit later, the man was sitting down as usual. They were all having a bite to eat. And the raven swooped down and grabbed the hat off the head of the young man that always fed it and was kind to it. And it flew away and it dropped it. And the young man cursed and thought, "How ungrateful, I always give you my food, steal my hat." So he went after his bonnet, but when he got near it, the raven swooped down and picked it up again and took it a bit further and dropped it again, and he went after it. And it did the same several times, taking his hat further and further away from the mine. Until eventually it dropped it, he went over and it didn't come back. He picked up his bonnet and he put it back on his head, and then he had a distant rumbling. And when he went back to the mine had collapsed. And all the men that were inside were killed. He was the only survivor because the raven had saved him. But then the raven flew to the Holy Land to get what they call the Victory Stone. I guess it's called the Philosopher's Stone these days as well. But it was known as the Victory Stone. It was known in Iceland as well. It was called the Victory Stone. And it was the victory over death. It could restore life. And it flew to the Holy Land and it found the Victory Stone, and it brought it back in its beak, and it touched the eggs with it, so that each egg became alive again, became fertile, and they could sit on it and hatch out its brood. But it wasn't only the stone it brought back, because in its feathers there was a seed. It had rested under a rose bush one night, and the seed had got lodged in its feathers and fell out in dareness. And it took root, and it grew there, and they called it the Rose of King. That's the story. And that's 5 past, so my apologies, because I've not quite kept it bang on time, but you're bloody lucky that it's not 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It could easily be. I would just like to thank COVID for making this possible. Poor woman. Anyway, there isn't a charge for this. If you wish to make a donation, you're welcome to. If you don't, you're welcome to. Or not to. And also, I mean, this has nothing to do with the museum. This is kind of bad. I've got 2 bosses in the audience. It's always terrible when you have people in the audience who can find it. But the Storytelling Festival starts the week after next, and it's around different places in Orkney. And we've got some fabulous storytellers coming. We have Shirley Cumbers, who's a Jewish bit-siller. She carries the tradition, the stories of her people, and this is hundreds of stories learned from her mother who survived Auschwitz, Dutch Jews. And Peter Chand, who is a storyteller from India, and a rather wonderful storyteller. And also Catherine Suter, who did, you may not, well, some of you may recognise, well, my wife will recognise, probably the only one that does. This image is actually from a book called Folk Tales, which I wrote 9 years ago when it was published, done by Catherine Suter. And Catherine is coming along as well to do live art, live drawings to show me these stories, which will be filmed and on a screen behind you, so you can see the magic appearing. So art, stories, and who knows what else. But there's leaflets there, help yourself. Thank you for coming, and it's been great, a lot more people than I expected. So, thank you.